Hey guys, and welcome back to Z3 Cubing. Today I'm going to show you how I made this Z3 cube in the shape of my logo. So today I'm basically going to be walking through the modding process of creating this Z3 cube that you just saw in my intro. I actually made this almost completely out of normal Rubik's Cube parts, and in fact all the hardware and the plastic on this puzzle came from a single cheeky sail 3x3. So let's go ahead and get into this by taking it apart. So I started off by just taking out all the pieces, and then I continued on to take apart the entire core by just unscrewing the center pieces. Now I took the actual core piece of the puzzle and used a Dremel to cut off each of these 6 little protruding parts, which will come in handy later. Then I went back to the other original 3x3 parts, the edges and the corners, which I would go on to make the whole shape of the logo out of. And so basically I would kind of cut off the excess parts of the mechanism that I wouldn't need anymore, and use these little cubes as like building blocks to make the whole shape of the logo out of. I also cut some of the pieces into specific angles, like the piece you see here that makes up the slanted part of the Z. And now at this point I needed to find a way to make all the pieces connect to each other so that they would rotate. So basically what I did is I drilled a hole in each of the connecting pieces, and then I took one of the little pieces of the core from earlier and I glued it into that hole so that I'd be able to screw a screw into it and connect 2 of the parts together. In other words, on one side of the connection of 2 pieces of the finished puzzle, you would just have the original 3x3 centerpiece where the screw and the spring would sit, and that would screw into a part of the core like you're seeing here, which is glued onto another piece of the puzzle. Next, I took a minute to glue on all the caps so that they wouldn't cause a problem later, and then I began the process of creating the entire shape of the logo just out of these building blocks that I mentioned earlier. So basically what I would do is I would scratch up one surface of a piece, and then I would put some super glue on it, glue it together with another piece, and do that a bunch of times until I had made the final shape of the puzzle. I basically just had to do this with a bunch of different combinations of shapes to make the final Z3, and it made it a little bit more complicated when I had to glue on the center pieces because they weren't a full cube to build with, and so it would leave these big gaps that I'd have to fill in later. And so at this point all the parts were done being glued together. You can see one example of a piece here that has a bunch of gaps that will need to be filled in later, like where that center piece was, and you can also see on the end here where I glued in that piece of the core where I'll be able to screw in another piece into it. So I went ahead and assembled the whole cube, and now I could see the initial movement of the pieces. Then I got out the epoxy sculpt, mixed it up in equal parts, and began to fill in all the holes in the puzzle. And that included straight up holes like the ones you can see right here, the cracks that were left by gluing the pieces together, as well as the gaps that I was talking about earlier where the center pieces are. Then I got out the belt sander and had to sand down each part into its final shape. It was quite the tedious process, and the curves were especially difficult on those pieces. It took many hours to get everything perfect, and it involves a couple incidents of accidentally sanding too far and having to reapply some epoxy sculpt to try again. I then sanded down all the faces of the puzzle once again with a higher grit sandpaper to make everything nice and smooth, and then rounded off all the sharp corners to give it that nice rounded feeling. I think now would be a good time to address a realization I had most of the way through making this puzzle that would have actually made the whole process of creating it a whole lot simpler. I think a lot of people in the comments have actually speculated that this was how I made the puzzle, and that would be using 3D printing. I could have designed it in less than an hour, then I'd just have to wait a few hours for it to print, and then I would basically be at this stage in the puzzle having barely done any work and only having a few steps left. But oh well, I guess I did it the hard way. Then I had it disassembled one last time, spray painted everything gloss black, and then assembled it once again for the final time, and then went ahead with the process of stickering. This took many more hours. It was definitely one of the longest parts of making this puzzle. Basically what I could do for all the straight pieces is just cut out one long strip of sticker material, and then I would kind of line it up on the puzzle, measure it out to the right length, cut it, and apply the sticker on. But for all the curved pieces, those ones got a lot more complicated, and don't even ask how I did that. So now I could finally see how the whole thing looked and turned. I was very happy with the final result, so now I could go ahead and film the intro. So that took a few more hours of filming it and then eventually editing it. I basically just did stop motion, so I would just move it one little bit at a time, take a picture, and repeat until I had the full sequence of motion that you can see in my intro. This was actually particularly difficult at some points because the cube wouldn't stand up by itself, so I had to kind of put some objects underneath it while I was taking the pictures, and then Photoshop them out of the pictures later, which took a lot of time. Anyway, that's pretty much it for this video. That was the entire process of making my new intro, including of course completely building the cube mod that was featured in that intro. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.